All right, everybody, here we are. My name is Tom Dutta, and I'm the host of the Quiet Warrior Show. We're live streaming today, and I'm about to introduce you to an amazing guest. We're live streaming across Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you haven't seen live stream before, well, we're popping up and we're giving you a chance to peek into the studio as we're taping for a future international audience podcast called The Quiet Warrior Show and a YouTube premiere, which will be the video. So at this point, go and find my YouTube channel, Tom Dutta, and subscribe to it so you can get the release in the future. And well, when the podcast comes out, let's honor our guest's work by giving it a high rating. And I believe that there's a lot we'll talk about today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the interview my good friend, and he's been here before. He's no stranger to me, Scott MacDonald. Scott, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I was just riffing as we were preparing offline about how Sadie was. And everybody, I want to tell you a little bit about Scott so you know the depth of this man's experience and background. Scott MacDonald, he is an author. He's an author of a book called Think Like a Dog. And, well, it's a rescue dog that he has. And it's a great book. And Scott talked about it last time he was on the show. And I believe Sadie might be just down somewhere where you are sleeping.
Yeah, she's checked out. Yeah, tough day.
Scott also wrote another book called Saving Investa, and we're going to talk a lot today about his latest book. And I'm just going to tell you more from the back of the book. He had a successful career working on commercial real estate projects throughout the world. He served as CEO or president of several companies. He was a longtime advisor to Morgan Stanley real estate funds in New York and London, and he provided educational opportunities for need-eligible students. That really is his current passion. And he's established an endowed scholarship programs at many universities, which is remarkable, Scott, that provide financial grants to students who are willing to assist others in need. Together with his experience, he's helping universities develop programs for more affordable education. And so I'm just going to hold it up to tease the audience. This is a book, and I've read it, called Education Without Debt. You can see giving back and paying it forward. So, Scott, welcome to the show. Hey, Scott, why don't we have some fun? Tell us something about yourself that you think most people who don't know you may not know.
Well, I have had a variety of jobs in my life, but I have been a dishwasher. I have been a street sweeper. I've bagged groceries. I've done pretty much everything at the bottom and at the top. So it's been quite a journey.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, they say that on your way to the top, you start at the bottom, and that's really where you learn. So thanks for sharing that, Scott. Everyone, if I have to encourage you that if you don't know Scott's backstory, the reason why Scott came to my show is I invited him because this is for quiet warriors, people who take a hero's journey. They learn through life and get to a point where something changes, and sometimes they overcome adversity, and then they turn that into a passion or a purpose. And I was so inspired, Scott, when I learned that this book was coming out, because you truly are somebody who lives with your purpose and passion. You're actually doing something to help change something that's, I will say, broken, at least in your country, and I would suggest on mine. So let's get into it. The book's about, education without debt, which sends me on a journey in my mind. Tell us why you wrote the book.
Yeah, Tom, there's been a lot of change in the way we live and how society functions, and I've seen it during my lifetime. When I went to college a long time ago, college was affordable. I worked in a factory all my vacations, and I made enough money that I could pay tuition, and I had a part-time job at school, and I was able to get a college education. Today, it doesn't work that way. And if you think about the arithmetic, I could make a couple $1,000s a year when I was working as a 18-year-old, and tuition and room and board were about $2,000 a year. So you could get by. My generation could get by. A lot of work, but you get by. Today, typical university in the U.S., a public school for in-state students, is about $25,000 to $35,000 a year. if you get a job, the factories aren't here anymore. So you'd get a job at a retail outlet, and maybe you would make $4,000 or $5,000 a year max. Take that back. If you worked all the time, maybe about $8,000 a year. That doesn't pay anything compared to $25,000 or $30,000 costs. So what we find out is that kids get scholarships, but more and more they're going into debt. And it's just a function that college costs have gone up disproportionate to incomes, and the gap is increasingly made up of debt. The average student who graduates from college in the U.S. graduates with $37,000 of debt.
Wow. Well, that's incredible.
If they get a job as a corporate CEO, no problem. But if they get a job working as a social worker, they're going to be paying debt for a long time.
Well, I mean, you're taking me on a journey in my mind. I want to read a couple things out of the book. I'll quote from it throughout the interview. Page number 9, I wrote down in my notes here. I'm turning my head. Those who watch this video later, I'm looking at my paper, not ignoring Scott. I call these horror stories. The first one was page 9 from Badia, California. I grew up in poverty and started working when I was 14. I went to college to find a brighter future and then to graduate school. I have over $120,000 in student loan debt. I work as a mental health therapist, and I will never be able to pay off my loans, making the possibility of a brighter future impossible. I'm tired. I've been working over half my life and have never been able to get ahead enough to breathe. My debt gives me anxiety. I mean, that in itself. Here's another one, and we'll give it back to you after this with a thought. I'm a special ed teacher who will never own anything because I have $160,000 in student loan debt, mostly private loans. Navient is no help, and I struggle every day worrying and stressing over it. I was the first in my family to ever go to college, but little did I know it was the worst decision. This was the mistake of my life. I mean, that was Kristen in New Jersey. And Scott, I mean, this is blowing my mind. I'm a Canadian in Vancouver, British Columbia here, and you're in California, I know. And I know you researched the book in your country, but we have similar issues up here. As I was saying to you before we got on the mic, that we have 1/10 of your population, and yet we have a debt load per capita approaching bankruptcy. My own daughter is in university back in New Brunswick, British Columbia, the other side of the country, 4th year. And unexpectedly in my lifeline, a few years ago, I slipped in a bathtub and sustained a serious brain injury. My ability to help her kind of stopped. And so she's piling up student debt as well. And I think you nailed it. People going into the workforce, there's a false promise of great jobs if you have a degree or this education, and things have changed. So let's get into your perspective on, I love it how you've identified the problem. Everybody, you got to read the book. The stories are incredible. But what I like about it is you've gone to the other side and started working on what's the solution, or what are the things we can do. So you started doing some things with your philanthropy, but tell us more about that. What's the path forward in your mind?
Okay, well, it's complicated, obviously. And so I think there are 2 questions there, Tom. One is, what have I done? And 2, what do I think the path forward is? I'll tell you the first one. What have I done? I had a successful career. I made a lot of money, and part of what I think we should do as a people is give back when you can. If you don't need everything, help other people. And I made it a passion to help students get an education. So I've set up scholarship funds at 5, soon to be 6 universities in the U.S. And the universities provide money to kids who qualify for financial aid. They otherwise couldn't go to school. They in turn agree to pay it forward. And they go help other people working for charities, doing community service, and have an impact on other people's lives. So I call it giving back and paying it forward. With other donors, not just my money, but we're up to about 100 students in the U.S. Who are getting money to go to college, graduate without as much debt, and helping other people along the way. And I think that is part of the solution. It's private help, but expecting something for that. And there are so many shortfalls in public services, whether it's pre-education for kids growing up in poverty, to medical clinics or people that don't have insurance, there's a whole variety of things. And these students who are going to college have a lot of energy, and they've accomplished wonderful things. So that's what I'm doing. Now, how do you solve the problem of student debt? That's a tough one, and there's not a silver bullet. And I don't really agree with those that just say, just forgive all the debt, because that doesn't solve the problem of all the new kids going to school. And that diminishes the efforts of those who actually were able to pay off their debt. So I think there are a lot of things. One, there needs to be more money in the system. A lot of the U.S. states have reduced their subsidies of public universities. If you look at typical U.S. University, it used to be the state would pay about 55% of the operating costs. It's now down about 15 to 20% of the operating costs. That's made up by tuition. They don't have other sources of funds for operating costs. So you go through all the factors that are going on to drive college costs up, and there needs to be some way of controlling and then funding that. And you can't have the state of South Carolina cutting back all their funds and expect the students there to graduate without a lot of debt. And you shouldn't expect the federal government to make up whatever the shortfall at the state. So that's part of it. Part of it is administrative costs are up as people require more and more reporting. There are more and more services required, which drive up costs. You think about a child that goes to college today, they have an iPad, they have a computer, they have a smartphone. So there's a whole technology backbone that goes into the college that has to be maintained. And that didn't used to happen. That's all administrative costs. There are mental health benefits now at schools. There's public safety issues. So it's all driving up the cost of going to college. The one of the tragic thoughts, it's only about 28% of college funding goes for instruction. Less than a third, a little bit more than a quarter. Everything else goes for all the back office stuff. Stunning.
That I'm going to jump in. First of all, thank you for what you're sharing with us. Hold up the book there, Scott. Everybody, we're interviewing Scott MacDonald, the author of Education Without Debt, Giving Back and Paying It Forward. And that's great, Scott. We'll tell everybody at the end how they can get that book. But if you've just joined us or heard what Scott said, I'll just play it back in a teaching moment here, that the cost for education is astronomical. And what he's just said, it almost sounds like a bombshell when you hear it, but it's far too true, that only 28%, I believe is what you said, of the money going into funding goes to the actual student education. The rest of it is administration. And Scott, you've had me go on a journey in my head here, so I'm just going to throw something out at you. I'm sure in the United States you've heard of the United Way. I mean, it's a globally recognized brand. I'm one like you. I like to dig and find out where does my money go. I remember when I was 21 years old, I became a manager of a bank branch, and like you, I'm a CEO. I used to be called a Tommy gun, a hired gun, and going back, I always had off my paycheck all these deductions, and this big campaign came out, and the corporation said, we have a big goal, and I never really got what it was. But later I pulled financial statements for a local United Way, and the amount of salaries to the bureaucracy, the vice presidents and the CEO, and just the percentage that went actually to community programs was astounding. It was backwards, like an inverted triangle. And the other thing I want to say to you is that I kind of honor you as a CEO, because everybody, if you don't know Scott's background, we talked about it, he's a turnaround CEO. But Scott, when you went into Investa, for example, the company that you went in to turn around, a real estate, I think, corporation in Australia,
right,
when You know, if you're the CEO, who owns the problem if the company's almost bankrupt? Well, I would assume you do,
Yeah.
and you have to take accountability and find a solution. And it blows my mind that America, one of the richest countries in the world, cannot find an answer. And so I started thinking about this. I'll give it back to you for your thoughts about my own life story. And you know my story from reading my book. My parents were immigrants, and my father and mother. My father was a traditional worker. His dad died from alcoholism back in Fiji. Came to Canada, pumped gas, became an electrician, and he didn't have a chance to go to university. He became a journeyman, so he took the path of a technical trade, which really worked for him. And then he became an author. He wrote a book, and they took him into a technical institute, and he became a teacher to the electrical trades. And he did very well. I had a middle to upper class lifestyle growing up from a laborer father. The thing is that there's when I grew up, the promise of education, what was put in me at a young age was, don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. The financial literacy piece of teaching me, even through school, nobody taught me how to save for my own education. My parents didn't know how. And I went on this dream of it'll be all okay. And then a right turn came when my father became an alcoholic, and my parents divorced when I was 12, and they lost the home. And so I went out and I had to find my own way to fund my own education. The other side of it is that I kind of passed down that same teaching to my own daughter, who's in fourth year university now. And I remember saying to my daughter, because I never had what I was expecting from my parents for my own education. I remember I didn't want to be like that. So I remember saying, Daddy's going to look after it. Don't worry. Well, guess what happened? My wife and I were caught in a financial fraud about 15 years ago and lost all our savings. So midlife, we had to reset. And even today, with the accident I had, I mentioned he had a brain injury, and I had to stop working for a period of time. The promise of funding education to help my daughter kind of disappeared. Where am I going with all this? I'm going to make a bold statement. I think that we need to do what you do as a CEO and flip it upside down and say accountability starts with the student. It starts with us teaching our children about literacy. If somebody had taught me that, hey, Tom, down the road, there may not be money, I would have been maybe more resilient and found alternatives. I'll say this and I'll give it back to you. Today, when I went to university, it wasn't right away. I left home because I was homeless for a while and I had to look after my mother. So I went into business and I fast tracked. Good people gave me opportunity. But you know what I found, Scott? I found something called OPM, other people's money. And I'm not saying that this applies to everybody, because as you said, not everybody can have a career as a manager or a business executive. But in every company I worked for, I started discovering there were internal programs for funding education. And I think today, when I look back as a lifelong learner, I've done enough education, they've told me, to have a master's, but it was all paid for by other people. Today's dollars, probably $100,000. A friend of mine said to me the other day, because I couldn't help my daughter and I was kind of depressed about it, they said, Google the word scholarship. And she said, there's free money out there. You just have to look for it. And I remember reaching out to my daughter and I said, go take a look at this. And I don't think she did. And so where I'm going with this, and I'll give it back to you, isn't there now a part of this where we have to start teaching young people and parenting and teaching students how to be more resilient and not expect and wait for others, to fund the education?
I think you put your finger on an important point, and that's financial literacy. When I interviewed a lot of people to write this book, and there are a lot of stories in the book, but there's just a lot of interviews that led to why I wrote the book. But one recurring theme is that a young person gets admitted to a university, good university. His family has not been to college before. He is just thrilled. They say, come on in and we're going to talk about how you're going to pay for it. And they say, we're going to give you this scholarship and this scholarship, and you need to sign these documents for these loans. And these kids they're 17, 18 years old. They are just so thrilled to be going to a university that they just sign all the documents and they don't really think twice. And then Second year, they go back to the same office, sign more documents, get more money. And in the U.S., if it's federal loans, there's no interest and no payments until 6 months after you graduate. So it feels like it's free money. And these kids just sign up and they're thrilled, and then they graduate or they drop out or something happens. And all of a sudden they realize that they have 30 or 40 or 50, $100,000 of debt, and they have to pay it. And if they get a job that is not a high-paying job, then they're underwater. And yes, there are ways to pay less, but interest accumulates. We all know how interest can compound over time. And so you see all these stories where people borrowed $30,000 and now they owe $100,000 because they've been working, making their payments every month, but not paying the full amount as they're allowed not to, and have accumulated interest. So there needs to be more financial literacy. When that kid walks into the education enrollment and financial funding office at the university, they'll tell you you're borrowing $20,000 this year. They'll disclose that, and usually you sign something that says you acknowledge, but you don't really know. You're not really literate. What they need to do is say, okay, and this is how much you're going to have to pay back, and accumulate that every year. And if you really are going to become a park ranger, which is what you want to be, or an art history consultant, this is how much you're probably going to make. And you may be making less money than you're going to be paying in your student debt. Nobody does that. No one discloses that. The universities are getting better at telling the kids, you're going to have to pay this money back. And in fact, Indiana University, my undergraduate school, where I've set up one of these programs, they developed a process and forms saying, now you're borrowing $20,000 this year. If this continues, you're going to borrow this much over your college career, and you're going to have to pay back this much. And at these interest rates, do you really want to burden yourself with this much money? And since they started this program, on average, the kid goes back, talks to his parents, his grandparents, maybe his aunt, comes back and requests less money, because all of a sudden that 17 or 18-year-old has been given financial information and has become more literate. So financial literacy is really key. I have a friend who sent me a letter, someone who I used to work with and I had lost touch with, and he had read the book. He said his son, who was very bright, had a dream school, Notre Dame, wanted to go there, got admitted. Notre Dame is pretty expensive, got some scholarships, but they didn't have nearly enough money. And he would have graduated had he gone there with $100,000 of debt. Instead, having talked through this with his dad, he went to the University of California at Berkeley, which is a great school, and graduated with no debt. So then he didn't get a job right away. There was a recession when he came out, but he's fine. He doesn't have $100,000 of debt compounding interest every month. So unfortunately, a lot of the kids that go to school don't have a parent like you, Tom, or like my friend had, to walk them through the financial issues. And the universities really aren't incentivized to do this. The university wants that kid in school paying tuition, because that's their revenue source. They need that to pay their bills. And once the kid leaves the school, they're off the hook. They have no liability for loan defaults. It's all government or private lenders. So they're not going to solve the problem. We're going to have to figure out how to get better financial literacy and tools to the kids going to school.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just making notes madly here. Again, everybody, we're talking about education without debt, giving back and paying it forward, Scott MacDonald's new book. And it's a well-written and researched book, Scott. I love it. And I recommend everybody gets it, read it, go and give a review, because how authors work gets known as if we post reviews on, say, Amazon or online. At the back, there is a conclusion, and there's some 9 points about what we need to do. So I would just love that. There's a bit of a plan in there that Scott's put together, being informed by others. I want to go back on a few things you said that kind of got into my head when you were just talking about that last part about the financial literacy. Just go to give a throwback in time when I was growing in my early career, Scott. I didn't have children, but we had programs in Canada. One was the Registered Educational Savings Plan, much like an RRSP, which is where you can put a percentage of your income into a plan, and you could deduct that off your income tax. So we would put $25 a month aside, and we accumulated, some $10,000 or so in that, and that would go tax free to the children for their education. Now, I know it's only a small amount of money, but it's another example of a tool. The other thing is I was a banker, and I remember when I was teaching or selling mutual funds, we used to talk about the rule of 72. You know about that one, right? Where you put $1 in and there's a calculation based on interest rate, and you can figure out how many years to double your money. Well, man, Scott, back then when interest rates were 8-10%, I remember when I bought my first Chevy Chevette, I was 18 years old. Dear old dad said, Tom, I want to help you get your car. So we went to the local credit union and he had me sign a loan at 21%. I didn't curse him till later in my life when I realized, but I paid it off. But the thing is, in today's interest environment, I used to be able to say to my children, put $25 aside off your paycheck, or when you're in, 12, 13, 14, working your paper route from that kind of thing. And, throughout your life, the rule of 72, you can accumulate $1 million. Well, that's no longer the case. Many of these strategies have disappeared. The other people's money strategy I mentioned was one I took advantage of, but if I flip this over about my roots to India, there are countries out there that have no wealth, and they're finding ways to create schools for 100 kids at a fraction of the cost, where all the money goes to the right place. So it's a dichotomy, and it really, really bothers me. Out of your book, page 19, it's called Betrayed by the Dream Factory, Samuel Garner. I just want to read a passage here. And my life and career had been scarred by the naive exchange I made at college, an education of questionable value for a dangerous amount of debt. Every once in a while, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I watch college commencement ceremonies on YouTube. These rituals remind me how perverse our higher education system is, and of the empty idealism that colleges and universities sell us. I'm a consumer of those vacuous platitudes and a victim of the system. After finishing my master's degree in 2008, and good for him, I found out, as in I didn't already know, that I had $200,000 in student debt. Some well-paying professions might make this amount manageable, but for a bioethicist like me, it's been crushing. Many things have to go wrong for this to happen. So I want to go back to what I dripped on you. I was a loan officer as well in the bank, and I learned at age 21 how to use debt ratios. People came in applying for credit to buy car loans, and it's common sense. Let's see if you have the income to pay for it.
Yeah.
And later in my lending career, before I became a manager, Scott, I saw so many applications of young people in their maybe late 20s who had finished their degrees, coming in, applying for the mortgage on the new place, the apartment, and they had these huge debt figures. And they started kicking in, as you said, here in Canada, the no interest period goes away and you have to start making payments. And when I interviewed them and asked them, did you factor in at any point in time that those payments would eventually kick in? It was like deer in the headlight. And it reminds me of, I call what you said about the way education's funding sold, I call it the timeshare effect. They put you in a place where your head's in the dream side, and you feel great and you sign these contracts, and then later you figure out you got to pay for it, and people want to then dump the contract. So I love your point about literacy. I think that's one of the legs of the equation. Let me get into some positive stuff about a story in the book that really stole my heart. Pretty much at the end, page 187, this was about Roman Reza, and it's titled My Story from Farm Worker Boy to Pediatrician. It's a really heartwarming story, but it's a challenging story. You might want to come on my show and talk about it one day. This man went through his own dark night of the soul, but he emerged, somewhat victorious. Can you talk about that story with us?
Yeah, Ramon is a very inspirational guy, somebody that I know personally. He wrote a book called Out of the Fields. He grew up in a farm working family. He was raised by his grandparents. His father wasn't present, and his mother had some addiction issues. So he was raised in an extended family, and they were farm workers. So they went out in the fields every day and picked whatever the crops that were coming in. And he decided that he wanted to be better than that. Better, not in a sense of more productive or nicer, but he wanted a better life than spending his life picking beans and oranges and berries. And he managed with huge effort to get to college and go on to medical school. And he is a pediatrician today in Central California, serving primarily farm workers, but in private practice, and is just a very inspirational guy. All that he had to go through to get to where he was, and he graduated, even though he had a lot of scholarships. He graduated with a fair amount of debt. I just talked to him the other day, and he was telling me that his son is a doctor now, and his daughter is not a doctor, but his son is. But his son has a couple $100,000 of debt through school because he's getting his medical degree and so forth. And Ramon keeps saying, "So when am I going to have grandkids?" And his son said, "When I pay off my student debt." So that's a common, and when you go through this, I mean, people are delaying kids, they're delaying marriage, they're delaying home buying, they're delaying all kinds of stuff because of this oppressive level of student. There is more student debt in the United States than there is credit card debt.
Yeah.
There's more student debt than auto debt, any other debt except home mortgages. And it's growing exponentially. So it's a huge problem, and it's beginning to affect people's lives.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Everybody, the book that we're talking about, Education Without Debt, Giving Back and Paying It Forward, it's not all doom and gloom. At the end of the book, there's some heartwarming stories, and I love this because you're a man of painting hope, and I just love the titles. Finding a Purpose After Prison, Martin Leva. From Night Watchman to College Success, to Carlos Hickson. Overcoming Adversity to Earn a Degree, Riley Bender. Interesting. And those stories, I recommend everybody get the book and read it. I want to talk about another side of this that might be somewhat controversial to some people, but that's where I go, because I believe, like you, that there's an answer that's deeper than on the surface here. And that is about choosing the right education. And I never asked you, Scott, about your education, how it was paid for. You obviously were a man who started in the sweeping and doing all those things you said to me, just like everybody else, and you fell into success as a CEO, were able to become somewhat self-sufficient. Not everybody's like that. That's maybe 1% of the world. I've seen so many people when I was in my CEO work for public companies. Today I run my own, that they came in with resumes with MBAs and degrees. And I'd say I can never remember too many that were actually doing what their education positioned them to do. Unless it was a doctor or something specific. And I began wondering about how do children know what the right education is, and then I had this told to me, which really upset me. It was about 10 years ago. You've heard of MBAs, I'm sure, right?
Sure.
Yeah, of course. And there was a time, I'm dating myself a bit here, where I was invited to a hotel here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And at that time, I was a senior manager in a financial firm. And they wined and dined us with champagne. I never forget it. And they had a PowerPoint. They showed us this new thing called an MBA. The room was full of people in suit and ties, young people. And it was $80,000 for this 2-year program, $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
And they were targeting the people who were young entrepreneurs or people in business. They probably figured, well, they have companies behind them. They're probably better apt to get the funding for it. And what they did, and I realized through friends who've done MBAs, don't get me wrong, I value MBAs. I'd like to do one for myself. But I started looking at it, and it's a package of general education with an experience wrapped around it that gives you a lot of broad general knowledge. And so I have a friend high up in the education system, and a long time ago I said to him, what's with all this MBA? It's like a trend, it's like a fad. And in the sales pitch, it's kind of what you said. It's the false dream. And we were told, if you get this thing, you're going to increase, they're making bold statements, increase your income by X%. And they're showing us all this promise. And many of the people who did that didn't get the ROI on it. In fact, they're still paying for it. So this friend of mine said to me quietly, and whether it's true or not, it's controversial. He said, you know why we did that? He said, because we couldn't put bums in seats and we needed the funding for our universities. So we got together and we came up with this slick program and marketed it. And we put this marketing effort and we gave the dream that this will get you in the door with a better job. It'll get you this and that. And he said that became a cash cow. So when I was hiring people in vice president up roles, a lot of the MBAs who came in, smart people had done that general education, but not a lot of street smarts, very analytical. And I began seeing the amount of debt they took on to afford those MBAs. And when I asked some of them, why did you do it? They said, well, because everybody else applying had one, and all my friends are taking it. And we were told, if you do this, you get a better shot at a good job. Now, I want to kind of make a statement around this. I'm not against MBAs. I think it's a valuable program. Now you can do it in a year for a fraction of the cost. There's MBAs online. But I was thinking one last thing on the right education. I have another friend who did a TED Talk, and Scott, he said, the education institutions are teaching our students about a world they don't even know yet. And they're struggling on what's the right curriculum. And there's AI and all these things that are rapidly innovating and changing the world. So I think part I want to give it back to you is in your choices of your education and just any advice to students or young people. Maybe we need to take a pause and start doing what maybe you did as a CEO when you take over a faltering company. I know that CEOs will create visions. What's the future look like? And create an action plan to get there. Maybe we need to start teaching our children that. What's the future vision of your life, and what are the things you need for your education to get there versus just jumping in? I've said a lot there, but I just give it back to you. I ramble, but I'm not looking for anything, but give me some thoughts about that.
Well, I think there are different people in different circumstances. And the circumstance you point out, people from, maybe call it middle class, who then take on debt to improve their hireability. And that can work. It can also impose a financial burden. And if they have some financial literacy and an advisor, like a parent, it helps a lot. There are a lot of other people, and these are people that I'm more likely to encounter through the scholarship program, that come from poor families that are just so thrilled to be going to college that they don't really think through all this stuff. And they enter a world in which they are just oblivious to finance and payback. And unlike when you were a lender and you underwrote the likelihood of paying back if you're going to borrow a car or buy a car and borrow money, the same underwriting doesn't happen. So the university that arranges a loan and the federal government that provides the cash, there's no underwriting. There's no, are you able to pay this back? It's, you qualify, here's the money. And then the student, when he graduates or drops out, has to pay it back. And there's no penalty to the university if they never pay it back. So it's just a misaligned process that with better financial information can be better aligned and have more rational outcomes, such as, do you really want to pay for an MBA? How much more are you going to make? Or do you really want to pay for a college education in which you're going to learn music appreciation or something else, which would be really cool to know, but isn't going to generate much income. And if you're borrowing money to get there, you need to have a conversation as to, are you going to be able to pay it back? Now, in the US, there are so many compounding issues. Under federal law, you cannot get rid of student debt with bankruptcy. So if you lose everything you have and you file for bankruptcy, you can get rid of your car loan, you can get rid of your mortgage, you can get rid of your medical bills, you can get rid of your credit card debt. You cannot get rid of student debt. It will be with you until you die, and they will come after any estate that you have. Why is that? There's some historical political reasons, but it is another reason why the burden has grown so out of control.
Yeah, I didn't quite don't think I understood that about America, but that's astounding. And boy, I hope that there's a way to find some answers for that. Certainly, when they start talking about taking it out of the estate, that just doesn't work for me. Everybody, we're talking about education without debt. I want to shine the spotlight on you, Scott, as we move to wrap up in a little bit. And that is, you've done some great work in philanthropy. Earlier, we talked about that. Tell us a bit more about just quickly how you set up what you're doing. I know you have scholarship programs. There's at least 100 plus university students now that have benefited. I mean, that's just amazing to me. Tell us about that.
Well, I'll give you a bit of history. So I set up some scholarship programs at a small school in North Carolina, Davidson College. My two sons went to school there, and it's a small school, so I got to know people. And we had a program where needy kids got money, and then they paid it forward by helping other people. So I did that, went on with life, didn't think much about it. It was my way of giving back. And then I was in Australia running this company, and I got a phone call one day from a young woman who had been a MacDonald Scholar and had tracked me down because she was in Australia working. And she told me an incredible story that when she was at Davidson as a MacDonald Scholar, she decided that she was going to set up a school in Ethiopia and fund it, since the villages there had no schools. The cities had schools, but not the villages. And she raised the money and had a school built and had it operated. And her mother, who had health issues and was confined to a wheelchair, ran their website to solicit money, and she created a book and sold the book out of the trunk of her car. And anyhow, it was a very inspiring story about how a 19 to 20-year-old girl could actually change the world, create a school that was functioning, operating, giving people literacy in a place they otherwise wouldn't. So that inspired me to go to other bigger universities like Indiana, like the University of North Carolina, and the University of Michigan, and talk to them about the idea of raising money, providing scholarships to need-eligible students, and then having them do community service projects that are impactful. And the response has been overwhelming. I mean, people want to get into these programs. When I talk to the students, and I keep in touch with all the students on at least once and twice a year, and some much more frequently, they tell me it's life-changing. It's life-changing to reach out and help other people. And these are kids in need to start with, but helping people in more need. And what that has meant to them, and so it's been a pretty wonderful program. And writing the book is partly to encourage others to do things like that, and to encourage policymakers to address the issue.
Thank you for sharing that. My heart was just growing here, Scott, thinking about paying it forward, and I'm so proud of the work you're doing. And I think that's a big part of the message I get from you. It's a teaching moment, everybody, that if we were blessed with education or something in our life, paying it forward, helping others, they say there's two things, at least this is what I learned, Scott. that can keep you whole and happy for your life. And one is spirituality, and the other one is leaving a legacy. And you, sir, have left a legacy with this program. I read in the book, and just ask everybody to read it and find this. There were a couple other people I think you featured in there who are philanthropists, and just the photos of them with the big smiles on their faces. It must feel great knowing that, when you're gone to the kingdom above, that you'll have a legacy here. I have roots to India, and we haven't talked about this. Maybe I can work with you and pick your brain. I have a foundation in my company, and it's called Create Smiles. My company is Create. We create better people through people development. And one is to build some schools, particularly in India, my roots. And you see the smiles on faces when the kids who just can sit in the classroom and do something amazing, like learn a single book and a pen. It just lights their life. I'll finish with this, that, in a world where the young people will rule the future, I think this is a hidden issue, or an issue that wasn't talked about enough. And so I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing to bring the spotlight on it. We need to hear more from you on that. So why don't you tell us, as you hold up the book one more time, where we can get a hold of the book, and certainly contact you, Scott, if people want to learn more.
Yeah, oops, let me get in front here. Okay, Education Without Debt, Giving Back and Paying It Forward by Scott MacDonald. And local bookstores can order it. It's on Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble. All the normal places that you would buy a book. A lot of them, they don't carry an inventory, but they can order it. And most books in the U.S. anyhow are now on Amazon, and they can buy it directly on Amazon.
That's awesome. And now I want to honor you like I do on all my shows. I did this with you last time with 4 leadership words. I write them as you speak. They're not scripted. And the first one is giver. You're a giver, not a taker. It's amazing. Number 2 is inspirational. I am inspired, and so many people I know who you tell their stories with humility about how they've taken your scholarships and helping out. That's amazing. Trailblazer, Scott, creating these foundations or these things to give back. And the last one's hope. I hope you know this, but reading your book and certainly hearing that there's somebody out there that cares about this. If I'm a young person or saddled with debt, there is hope. So let's give you the last word on that. Anything you want to say to leave the world, or leave the children, the youth, with some hope that's a brighter future?
Yeah. In writing the book, I did not want to write a depressing book. I wanted to spotlight an issue that can be addressed. But as you point out, Tom, I incorporated a number of stories that inspired me. People that started with nothing, were able to get financial aid and get an education, and then go on and change the world. And there's some just wonderful people and wonderful stories that I was able to include. And I hopefully it will inspire others, and they'll feel good about the opportunity, as opposed to just the challenge of the debt.
Well, all right. What a great teaching moment, everybody. You'll have to listen back to that again. Inspiring words from Scott as we wrap up here. So everybody, find the book, Education Without Debt. Please get it, read it, do a review online. Scott, I'm committing to post a review for you this week. And everybody, find that true passion and purpose like Scott did from your own story, and live life that you deserve and desire, and get out there and change the world by solving a social issue like you're seeing Scott. Thanks, Scott, for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Stand by.